take your hands off of me, yeah. I wanna make it clear that you ain't got no power here.
An EMP is a burst of electromagnetic energy that can disrupt or damage electronic equipment. 3 types. E1, nuclear explosion high above the earth. E2, like lightning. Or E3, think solar flare or a slow pulse. And this is not science fiction. This is science. And while it might seem unlikely, and maybe it is possible, and ignoring it changes nothing. Expect an intense electromagnetic field that can impact electronic circuits, most likely causing them to overload and then failure. This includes microchips, electronic circuits, pacemakers, automobiles built after the early to mid 1980s, computers, you get it. It does not affect biological beings. Devices that are not plugged in can still be impacted and fail. Plugged-in devices are probably more likely to fail. The fear of nuclear EMP used against a people in war or terrorism might just be the most effective method to destroy a nation because infrastructure as a whole would fail and it would be chaos as soon as people start to get hungry. No supply chain, no power, no medical assistance. Our population as a whole does not know how to live under these circumstances.
You know, this is an important topic since it's almost certain to occur to us at one time or another. And when it happens, it's going to kill hundreds of millions of people. That's just in the United States. Worldwide, it's more than that. It can occur artificially through some sort of weapon, and that's what people think about. But sooner or later, it will occur naturally through the sun. So we're going to talk about EMPs. An electromagnetic pulse could have profound and far-reaching effects on the United States, depending on its source scale and systems of impact. An EMP is a burst of electromagnetic energy that can disrupt or damage electronic equipment and infrastructure. The most commonly discussed scenario involved high-altitude nuclear EMP, detonated in the atmosphere, which could affect a vast geographic area. But as I've already mentioned, sooner or later, the sun is going to spit one out, and that's when we're really going to get it up the ass. Now, what this essentially amounts to is a super-duper overload on every electronical device in the United States or even worldwide, from cars to computers. A powerful EMP could induce high currents and voltages in power lines, transformers, and other grid components, potentially frying critical infrastructure. High voltage transformers, which are difficult and time-consuming to replace, are especially vulnerable. The loss of the electrical grid would halt most modern systems relying on power, including water treatment, food distribution, and healthcare. Estimates suggest that a widespread grid failure could take months or even years to fully restore due to the complexity and global supply chain dependencies for replacement parts. A high-altitude detonation of 200 miles above the U.S. could theoretically blanket the entire continental U.S. with EMP effects, though the intensity would vary by altitude, yield, and location. I taught a book about this once. It was a novel, fictional, but it transpired during a time of a huge EMP, and you wouldn't believe. Nursing homes. All the old folks are going to die. Hospitals. Patients are going to die. People are going to die. People are going to run out of food, and they're going to be running around eating each other, and it's bad news, folks, and it's something we're not prepared for. It's just insane that we're not. Okay, so as briefly as I can, I'm going to go over an item-by-item analysis of all the different effects it could have on our society. And I think probably the most important one would be the effects on the communication system. there would be an immediate disruption. Cell towers, satellites, radio systems, and internet infrastructure could be disabled or severely damaged, cutting off communications for emergency response, government coordinations, and the public. Even if some devices survive, like small unplugged electronics, the broader communication network's reliance on powered infrastructure would limit functionality until power is restored. So even if your cell phone doesn't get it, the cell phone system of towers and, satellites, they're going to get it, folks, and your cell phone's not going to be worth anything. We're all just going to be fucked. I have a shortwave radio that I keep in my garage, and assuming that survives, I might be able to get radio signals, provided that anyone is emitting radio signals or broadcasting them. And naturally, there's going to be transportation and logistical concerns. Vehicle failures, for instance. Modern vehicles with electronic control units could stall or malfunction, though older vehicles without advanced electronics might remain operational. Studies suggest mixed outcomes, with some tests showing vehicles recovering after restarting, while others indicate a permanent change. Then there's supply chain breakdown. Planes, trains, and trucks reliant on electronic systems could stop, halting the delivery of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Ports and airports would also grind to a halt, exacerbating shortages. I think that if I were serious about mitigating the effects of one of these things on myself and my family, I think I would go out and buy a really old vehicle prior to the mid-1980s. And it's interesting, people are doing that. There was an old place here in Fort Worth that took old classic cars and restored them. And I went and looked at one, and there were lots of people going in there buying those old cars precisely because they weren't vulnerable to EMPs. So, that's a thought. I don't know. I'd certainly look into it if I had the money.
See, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
Okay, and then there are societal and economic consequences. In the short term, without power, communications, or transportation, urban areas would face immediate challenges. Loss of refrigeration, heating, and access to clean water could lead to panic and civil unrest within days. And of all those, the water is probably the most important. And then there'd be long-term fallout. Prolonged outages could cripple the economy, and it would. It's estimated that between 70 and 90% of all the people in this country would be dead within a year. And then disruption in the supply chain for fertilizers and pesticides and what have you would cripple food production. So you'd have, people eating each other. Nom, 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 tastes so good. Eat each other. Cannibalism. Sailors back in the old days, when they were stranded on a lifeboat, they would pick out one guy in the boat and kill him and drink his blood. So that's probably what would be happening. Are you ready for that?
Experts are also worried that China could use the high-altitude balloons for other nefarious purposes, like carrying a small nuclear EMP device, which, depending on the place of the detonation, could create more destruction than a nuclear ballistic missile. Such a device, detonated at high altitude, could knock out power and communications across the U.S., causing widespread chaos for a year or more without firing a single shot on the ground. According to U.S. military experts, a successful EMP attack over the East Coast, for instance, could kill 90% of the population within a year of an attack, and it could take 18 months to restore the electricity grid and social order. Around 99 nuclear reactors would likely melt down without electricity to cool them, and about 4.1 million people would have to be displaced from areas around the nuclear plants.
Okay, and there are two ways that this sort of thing can descend upon our heads. And one of them is a solar event. A natural EMP from a coronal mass ejection, like the 1859 Carrington event, could mimic some effects of a nuclear EMP. Although with a slower pulse that affects the grid, not much more than small electronics. The U.S. has some monitoring and mitigation strategies for these events, but preparedness varies. And then there's weaponized EMP. A nuclear EMP could be more intense and immediate, with effects tailored by altitude and yield. Non-nuclear EMP devices exist, but are shorter ranged and less likely to cause nationwide damage. Now, here in Texas has its own power grid, and they've passed laws to strengthen the power grid. I don't know how far along they've gotten with that, but they have supposedly been taking measures to protect the Texas power grid, which is good, I suppose. But a nuclear EMP, I mean, one of the ways the Chinese have been experimenting or have theorized that they would attack us with an EMP is to put the damn thing on a high-altitude weather balloon and fly it over America, which, of course, actually happened not too long ago. They floated a high-altitude weather balloon over the United States, and Herr Biden didn't even bother to shoot it down until people found out about it. Lord help me. Okay, mitigation and preparedness. The U.S. has taken steps to address EMP risks, including Executive Order 13865 in 2019, which tasks agencies like DHS and DOE with enhancing resilience. However, critics argue that civilian infrastructure remains largely unprotected. So President Trump tried to do something about it, but with the past administration, does anyone really think that anyone ever followed up on it? And then the cost and feasibility. Hardening the grid could cost billions, $2 to $20 billion. I mean, that's not much. That's not much at all. Involving surge protectors, Faraday cages, and spare parts stockpiles. Some argue this is a small price compared to the potential devastation, while others question the likelihood of such an attack warranting the investment. I don't think that I'd take the gamble. But, like this picture here, that's a surge protector you can get on Amazon, and it's actually touted as being an EMP protector for your car. You hook it up to your car battery, and, it's a surge protector. However, all these devices that I saw all say they're patent pending, which means they don't know if it works or not. They don't have a patent. Now, me and my wife and I have about 6 to 9 months worth of food I keep in my garage. And I have plenty of arms and ammunition to defend it. So if you're getting any ideas of coming over, just think about that. I think my problem right now is with water. I have a huge tank, about a 300-gallon tank I bought to store water, but if it all happens at once, there won't be any water. The water will be cut off. So I can't fill up my tank. I'm going to have to figure out a way to mitigate that problem. Water filters are obviously a way. However, you have to have the water in the first place to filter it. Interesting. I've got a place up in Oklahoma on the South Canadian River where I can bug out, I hope, assuming the owner of the land will allow me the privilege of staying there. And in that case, a filter would be okay because of the river. But, here in the city, and the thing is, if my car won't run, how am I going to get up there in the first place? This is a huge clusterfuck, folks, if it happens. Or perhaps I should say when it happens. If it's a coronal mass ejection, it would depend on what side of what side of the earth the sun is shining toward. Pardon me. If you're on the dark side, if it's night, you're going to be okay. But, if you're not, yeah, you're going to be screwed. And the thing is, it's like a 50-50 chance. So, I don't know. I don't know, man. I think that I would die before I eat somebody. If they were already dead of some other reason, then, yeah, maybe. But the idea of killing someone to eat them, I don't think I'd do that. I think I'd die first. I think I'd kill myself. But before I did, I'd take some nasty poison so that if anybody else came along to eat me, they'd be poisoned and die from me, and I'd just give them indigestion. At any rate, I hope this video's put some thoughts in your head. Maybe it'll get you off your ass, and maybe you can do something to try to help yourself out. I know I have, except that water, that's just occurred to me, and I can't, for the life of me, figure out why I hadn't thought of that before.
North Korea tested a super EMP weapon that could potentially wipe out nearly the entire U.S. population. So here's my question. How the hell do you know?
Almost everything is designed to operate on 120 volts or less. That computer sitting in front of you probably operates on 25 volts. It steps the power down but the outlets in this area put out 120 volts. Okay, so things that are designed to operate on 120 volts almost certainly are not going to survive when you inject 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 volts at the speed of light into them. Both the Department of Defense and the commission on which I served, we weren't just a paper commission. We were about actually testing modern electronics to see were the electronics vulnerable. We knew they would be vulnerable, but one of the questions we wanted to know is, are they getting more vulnerable? And they are.
Satan, take your hands off of me, yeah. I wanna make it clear that you ain't got no power here. Satan, take your hands off of me. Come on, fellas. Satan, take your hands off of me.